Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Critic.Reading.Writing. My name is Atu Kwesen, and I am Professor of English and Chair of the Department of African and African American Studies at Stanford University. This episode will focus on the relationship between class consciousness and magical realism in Isabel Allende's The House of Spirits. Like Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude, Allende's novel centers on an intergenerational family saga, this time of the Trueba family. But unlike Marquez's novel, there are extraordinary cycles of political violence from outside the family, as well as personal violence inside of it. The novel reflects the historically violent political history of Allende's own country, Chile. As we shall see, the principle of violence threatens to upend one of the core principles of magical realism, namely the scrupulous equivalence between the fantastic and the real. This is because the violence in the novel is tied to the unfolding of class war, such that the magical realist elements in the novel must be judged according to their relationship to different historical classes and thus to questions of equity and justice. The careful navigation of this problematic of violence and class war is central to the novel's success. It achieves this partly by structuring many fantastic incidents and events around well-rounded and admirable magical realist characters such as Rosa, Clara, and Alba, as well as the furry Barrabás, a cross between a sheep, a dog, and a mythical being. We know early on that the House of Spirits is a magical realist text because of the character of Rosa, whose skin at birth was white and smooth, without a wrinkle, like a porcelain doll, with green hair and yellow eyes, the most beautiful creature to be born on earth since the days of original sin, as the midwife put it, making the sign of the cross. Furthermore, we are told that the tone of her skin, with its soft bluish lights, and of her hair, as well as her slow movement and silent character, all made one think of some inhabitant of the sea. There was something of the fish to her. If she had had a scaly tail, she would have been a mermaid. But her two legs placed her squarely on the tenuous line between a human being and a creature of myth. Even though the midwife is startled, her mother Nevea is not, because she had had many dreams of her child before she was born. Rosa grows preternaturally beautiful and spends her time embroidering a giant tablecloth with the paradise of animals and waiting to be married to the gruff Esteban Trueba, who has gone away to try and make his fortune in the north of the country. Rosa's sister Clara, the third of 15 children of the Del Valle family, also showed early signs of mystical powers. In her case, it was clairvoyance, along with the power to move objects just by looking at them. She was also very distracted and was given to sleepwalking at odd times of day and night. The third creature of fantastical characteristics we are introduced to is the furry Barrabás, a cross between a dog, a sheep, a colt, and a magical being of legend. He was brought to the house by their intrepid uncle Marquez, Nevaeh's brother, who had traveled the world and amassed many fantastic stories along with incredible gifts that found their way to the Delval household, including Barrabás. Barrabás was Clara's responsibility and inseparable from her from the moment he arrived in the household. The description of all these fantastic characters and creatures are relayed to us completely matter-of-factly, with no sign that there's anything out of the ordinary with any of them. Early in the novel, Rosa inadvertently drinks some poison originally meant for the assassination of her father, Severo, who at the time had launched a political campaign for office as a liberal. There were suspicions that he had been assassinated by the conservatives. Being a wealthy landowner, it was assumed that he would stand as a conservative and not a liberal. But none of the Delvals was ever predictable. The death of Rosa marks a major turning point in the novel and also is the first instance of the direct assault on fantastic elements by the cynicism of politics. This is going to be a repeated cycle throughout the novel. Clara, then 10, had predicted that someone was going to die in their household. And even though she had no idea it was going to be her sister, the fact that her prediction came true proved so traumatic that she fell silent and did not utter a word for 9 years after that. As we are subsequently told, Clara entered her youth within the walls of her house in a world of terrifying stories and calm silences. It was a world in which time was not marked by calendars or watches, and objects had a life of their own, in which apparitions sat at the table and conversed with human beings. The past and the future formed part of a single unit, and the reality of the present was a kaleidoscope of jumbled mirrors where everything and anything could happen. Clara lived in a universe of her own invention, protected from life's inclement weather, where the prosaic truth of material objects mingled with the tumultuous reality of dreams, and the laws of physics and logic did not always apply. Clara speaks again out of the blue to announce to the astonished household that she is going to marry soon, and when asked, she responds plainly that it is going to be to Rosa's fiancé, the aforementioned Estefan Trueba. The household is thrown into complete uproar when she makes this announcement, but her family are so ecstatic that no one remembers the prediction itself until much later when Estefan alights from his carriage one fine afternoon to ask the Delval parents whether they have another daughter of marriageable age. Upon getting married and going to live with Estefan on his plantation, Clara sets out to oversee the conversion of their house into an exquisite architectural enigma, full of wayward passages and strange rooms leading to nowhere. As we are told, he could hardly guess that the solemn, cubic, dense, pompous house, which sat like a hat amid its green and geometric surroundings, would end up full of protuberances and incrustations, of twisted staircases that led to empty spaces, of turrets of small windows that could not be opened, doors hanging in midair, crooked hallways, and portholes that linked the living quarters so that people could communicate during siesta, all of which were Clara's inspiration. Every time a new guest arrived, she would have another room built in another part of the house. And if the spirits told her that there was a hidden treasure or an unburied body in the foundation, she would have a wall knocked down until the mansion was transformed into an enchanted labyrinth that was impossible to clean and that defied any number of state and city laws. In this phase of her life, Clara's clairvoyance becomes firmly tied to doing charity work among the peasants. She enters a moment of deep existential crisis that shakes the foundation of her beliefs. The roots of her crisis have been sown early in the novel, but it is only the massive earthquake that destroys her home and renders many of the farm workers around her homeless and destitute that it becomes manifest to her. The reasons for this existential crisis are threefold. First is her estrangement from her husband Estefan Trueba, something which, considering their radically different attitudes to life, was always ready to erupt into view from the very moment they got married. He desires total possession and domination of all that lies before him. In the case of his marriage, he seeks to possess his wife sexually, emotionally, and imaginatively. It is an obsession which he very early realizes he cannot fulfill. For Clara is given to extreme distractedness and is shown to constantly inhabit a liminal world between this one and that of spirits, with whom she has regular and ongoing conversations. Estefan thinks he's helping the peasants that work for them by way of dominating them. He brings a warped form of civilization to the peasants on his farm and is extraordinarily sexist, paternalistic, and exploitative. Clara, for her part, embarks on helping the peasants through acts of charity and caregiving. Unfortunately, she recognizes pretty quickly that her charity does not ever really address their needs, but only touches the surface of those needs. For to give them true justice, they need their own forms of organization and the evolution of a revolutionary class consciousness, something that arrives partly due to the political events taking place outside the Trueba plantation, such as the First World War and the influx of exiles carrying revolutionary ideas. Also crucial is the development of a form of liberation theology that is evident in the pronouncements of the clergy, one of whom keeps repeating that the church authorities were on the right, but Jesus was always on the left. Clara's fortitude and quiet acts of charity, along with her talking with spirits, is extraordinarily annoying to her husband, but it is a form of resistance that he does not know how to deal with. The second reason for Clara's existential crisis is the shocked recognition after the earthquake that her clairvoyance is not helpful for solving any of the natural and emotional disasters that plague the world and also her family. It is almost an exasperated recognition, one which strikes her at the same time that she comes to a subliminal recognition of a comradely and romantic attachment to Pedro Garcia Segundo, a gentle and elderly peasant on the farm. He becomes a confidant, and she shares many nebulous feelings with him, all of which he listens to attentively and with kindness. He is a direct contrast to her husband, and while their friendship remains purely platonic, it is nevertheless filled with great beauty. The third source of Clara's existential crisis is that she's supremely unsuited to family life. Much of the time, her family is taken care of by surrogate mothers such as Nana from her family side and Ferula from that of her husband. She, on the other hand, spends her days in a semi-dreamlike state. With time, however, Clara is gradually pushed to take care of her household, something that becomes especially critical after the earthquake and the death of Nana. However, her clairvoyance does not help her notice the tragic love affair unfolding between her daughter Blanca and the peasant worker Gracia, or to foresee the complications that their scheming is going to bring into her household when her husband finds out. While her powers of clairvoyance enable her to foresee events, they do not help her take control of her immediate environment in any meaningful way. The House of Spirits is explicitly political, but in a way that is quite different from Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude. Violence is parodic in Marquez in two main ways. Its action as a motor of history occurs in the distant background to the events in Macondo, and Macondo manages somehow to subsume the violence and domesticate it into the natural rhythms of the Buendia household and the society in general. For example, Arcadio, who becomes military commander of Macondo in Colonel Aureliano Buendia's absence, is a constant object of ridicule by his grandmother Ursula. And when he is shot by firing squad, he is promptly forgotten by the narrative. Along with Aureliano Jose, who is shot in the back by soldiers at the film theater, Arcadio is never referred to in the text again. It is almost as if there's a strategic amnesia about the violence that occurs within Macondo. Furthermore, Colonel Aureliano Buendia, at the center of much of the events of the Civil War, repudiates the logic of the war and comes back home to live a peaceful and uneventful life and to die a rather ordinary death. Also, violence in 100 Years of Solitude is rendered firmly part of the fabric of the fantastic. This is seen mainly in the after effects of the Banana Plantation Massacre, when Aureliano Segundo's sanity about the events he has witnessed is placed in doubt because they appear to him to have an inherently unreal quality that only he seems to have experienced. The events of the Banana Plantation Massacre are so extreme in their violence that it tips the event over into the fantastical and is registered in the mind of Aureliano Segundo as part reality and part nightmare sequence. In contrast, in the House of Spirits, violence punctuates the evolution of a series of political orders and is experienced directly by members of the Trueba household. We have already noted how Rosa drinks the poison originally meant for her father. The depiction of the evolution of political orders is expressed through a series of explicit and often heated debates between individual characters about political ideology. The different standpoints are represented by various characters that take up the ideological positions of liberals, conservatives, labor, and subsequently the army. And each of the different ideological positions is tied ultimately to the Trueba household. Thus, even though Estefan is an uncompromising conservative, his son Jaime becomes a liberal labor organizer, while Estefan Jr., a disowned child he had out of wedlock with a peasant, is the army general who wreaks havoc on his family and on the rest of the country when he spearheads a successful coup. The violence and humiliations he unleashes on the Trueba household is wanton and deeply unsettling. But the point of it is that unlike in 100 Years of Solitude, this fictional household is not impervious to the cataclysms of political history. Even though the novel illustrates the movement of a Marxist dialectic in the unfolding of Chilean political history, there is one significant element that does not allow the House of Spirits to become a mere Marxist propaganda document. And that is the fact that the movement of the dialectic that Allende sets out does not deliver the proletarian subaltern classes into the glory of political power, but rather takes power away from them and effectively places it in the hands of the military class. The military class in the novel is shown to be the synthesis of the negative aspects of both liberal and conservative ideologies. In this way, the novel does not depict the typical Marxist dialectical synthesis of positive elements of the two political traditions, but rather the fusion of negative ones and the blockage of the proletariat from gaining effective power. In collusion with external forces, in the novel imagined as the United States, the military class becomes almost invincible. In this, Allende is imaginatively rendering the essential movement of the political history of South American totalitarian regimes. In many respects, however, Allende's narrativization of her continent's political history can be extrapolated to apply to other totalitarian military regimes in Africa, Asia, and in the Third World more generally, from the heady days of the attainment of independence in the 1950s and 60s through the nightmares of coups d'etats and the rule of military juntas well into the 2000s. While in the House of Spirits, political violence is shown to institute and regulate historical causality, this violence is in its turn countered by women such as Clara and Alba, mother and granddaughter respectively, who in different generations offer different revolutionary commitments disguised as women's concerns. They challenge the cynicism of both the political classes and that of the army. This comes at immense cost to them, but it is a price they pay not just out of conviction, but because their instincts of nurture are the creative and epic engines that ultimately fuel the opposition to all forms of violence as such. And they do this not by delivering grand speeches or making heroic gestures, but simply through elevating the simple everyday gestures of love and caregiving into historic principles that counter the illogical madness of the politicians and army generals. In this, their everyday gestures of rebellion are elevated to the level of epic acts because it is the will to say no, whatever way we find it within ourselves, that makes the ordinary people so terrifying to those in power. Thank you very much. Please remember to check out the suggested readings in the episode description. And if you like this episode, give a thumbs up, subscribe and share. Hit the notifications bell so that you do not miss out on any upcoming episodes. And enter your comments in the section below. See you next week.